Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Redington and CheckPoint session. I request you all to mute yourself. And we have Afzal, our pre-sales consultant from Redington Value, who will be running throughout the session. We hope we will provide you all the information required, and you can go to the Q&A button on the left. At the end of the session, we will answer all your questions. Afzal, over to you.
Thank you so much for that. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Afzal Sheikh, pre-sales for Emerging Security Portfolio and Checkpoint. So today I'd like to talk about securing your remote connectivity with Checkpoint. Right. To begin with, I'd like to give you a brief overview of Checkpoint as an organization. Well, Checkpoint is a 27-year-old public listed company whose primary focus is on firewalling and security. So Checkpoint basically boasts of their patented stateful inspection, which forms the basic structure of most of the firewalls that we have these days. Like any next generation firewall you say, it had the main packet flow is the stateful inspection by packet flow, right? So it was patented by Checkpoint itself, which makes them kind of an inventor when it comes to the firewalls that we have. So it has been standing as a leader in most of the market research organizations like Gartner for more than a decade now. So if you have a look into this report that I have, you can see that Checkpoint is standing as a leader over here. So if you backtrack 10 years, so you'll be able to see that Checkpoint has been standing as a leader since past 10 years or even more. Right. So so talking about the problems that we are having these days is absolutely due to the COVID-19 crisis that are going on. So we know that employees have been working from home for quite a time, and we are not really kind of sure till when we are going to continue working from home. So in order for us to work from home, we would require the VPN connectivity. So right. So our concern today, as of today, is to provide our employees and vendors some kind of a flexibility to work from home as well as to ensure security, because we cannot really compromise on the security part of it, right? Especially in this hour of uncertainty, right? So the ongoing trend as of now is that the hackers are trying to leverage the current situations to have their malicious intentions being met, right? And as an example, we saw on March 12th how an attack was launched on the Mongolian government, right? And most of the times, not just specific to the Mongolian government use case, most of the time the common means, or you could say the vector of malicious activity is the documents, as in they create a document and then they run a dynamic code behind it. And once they do so, they are able to deliver whatever they want to. For example, they would invoke some kind of a macros in the backend of the document, and then they just send across the document. And once they do so, when the document gets installed on the end machine, the dynamic content gets executed based on the triggers which has been written in the payload itself. Right. So these are the most common attempts of delivering a malware. Right. So according to the threat intelligence report, which Checkpoint had submitted, more than 4,000 coronavirus related domains had been registered, right? Which is kind of fishy, because most of the times in such crisis, even we saw similar case in when Ebola was going on, right? We saw that domain takeovers had become a very common practice, which is actually very, very dangerous. All right. So moving forward, what are the different options we have as of now? The most common and the intuitive option we have as of now or at present is VPN, giving out the VPN access. Right. So today I'd like to bring you, make you aware of the different kind of VPN options that Checkpoint has to offer. Right. So Checkpoint has a couple of solutions for the remote access, the most common being clientless or the browser-based VPN. So it's kind of it's a very understood kind of a concept. It's been there for quite a while now. So in which a client, all he does, or an end user, it could be an employee, it could be a remote vendor, all he has to do is that he has to open his browser and he has to type in the SSL VPN URL, and he can authenticate to it. And after doing so, the SSL handshake is being performed with the gateway, with our security gateway device, which is believed to be the enforcement module, right? A handshake has been done from the browser to the Checkpoint security gateway. right? And once the handshake is done, the tunnel gets established from the browser to the gateway. And gateway, what it does is that based on the routing table information, it would forward the traffic to the data center, as in the resources that the person would want to access, right? So this is a typical operation of the clientless VPN or SSL VPN. But yes, there is one more point to be noted over here, that let's say that in our SSL VPN policy, if we have turned on the SSL deep inspection, what would happen is that the SSL connection would be first formed to the gateway, and then from there, another SSL VPN, the SSL session would be created to the end resources that you're trying to access, right? So this is how a typical SSL VPN connection looks like, right? And if we were to have a look into the handshake, which is the main principle behind the SSL VPN, right? We see a client hello over here. This is just to refresh your memory in case you have forgotten, right? So first, a client hello is being sent from the browser. And in the client hello packet, we see all the cipher suites that are present inside the browser. And what a server is expected to be doing is, it's supposed to be choosing the most common and the most secure cipher suite, which has been offered by client hello. So what server hello does is that it chooses a cipher suite and it sends out its certificate along with the Diffie-Hellman key. And it says that, hey, I'm done with my hello. Let's continue with the communication. And what the client does is that it sends out the key, as in client basically encrypts the pre-master secret that has been generated using server's public key, which is exchanged in the form of a certificate over there in this step. And what it does is that it encrypts it using the public key and it sends it across to the server. And server, what it can do is it can decrypt the key which has been sent across using its own private key and convert that into a master secret, right? And then finally, there are only few of the chain cipher spec messages exchanged between them in certain regular intervals of time, where the pending cipher specs are copied to the current cipher spec, right? So this is how a typical SSL handshake takes place. And once this takes place, we have the SSL connection which has been created, SSL tunnel can be established, and then the communication from there can be carried on, right? The second option that we have is a client-based IPSec VPN remote access. In this case, what happens is that your client in which you are installing the agent, right? You do the phase 1 and phase 2 negotiation and you form a connection with the gateway, and gateway gives you an IP address from the office pool which has been created at the time of configuring it, and then you use the same IP pool to access the remote resources, right? So if we were to talk about the phase 1 and phase 2 negotiations, we know that very well. Phase 1 can either be main mode or it can be aggressive mode. In the main mode, we exchange 6 packets about hashing that we need to be using, encryption that has to be used, the lifetime of the key, and your Diffie-Hellman group, which needs to be on the basis of which the Diffie-Hellman key will be created. And we need to make sure that, or we need to remember this point, that as the number of Diffie-Hellman group increases, the complexity of the key would eventually increase. So you need to plan it accordingly, because as the complexity and the security increases, the processing time would increase a little. So we need to be a little more considerate about what exactly we would want to achieve over here. And in the last packet, we have authentication and peer ID information being exchanged. And by the end of the IKE phase 1, right, a single tunnel, which is bidirectional in nature, will be created, right? And all these negotiations that we had made in the phase 1, all of them would be applicable to the tunnel security, not to the data which is being transferred across, right? And in the phase 2, we'll be creating multiple unidirectional tunnels based on the negotiations we make, and then the data transfer would be encrypted using the negotiations we had made, or 2 security gateways had made. All right. So by the end of this, we must be having the tunnel in place. It would look something like this. Right? A tunnel will be created like this. And then finally, our office IP pool, as in at the time of configuring the solution, what we do is that we allocate an office IP pool. right? It would be a range of IP addresses. So one of those ranges would be allocated to the remote VPN user, right? And then he should be potentially able to access all the resources that he intends to access. It could be any RDP, it could be SSH, it could be an application, it could be anything, right? As long he has the IP address to access, he should be potentially able to access it. All right. Right. Moving forward, when we talk about the clientless VPN, right, it's fast and secure. It's a very fast and secure way of accessing to the corporate resources from home, right? Here we can use a couple of authentication mechanisms such as a checkpoint password. We can use certificates. We can use radius, or we can also use secure ID, right? So in this case, we'll be using mobile access blade license, right, which is made for the SSL VPN generally, right? So we'll be using that blade to procure the license, right? So when it comes to client-based IPsec VPN remote access, we have three different kinds over here. One is SSL network extender, checkpoint mobile for Windows, and endpoint VPN security VPN. We have three options which we can possibly go for over here. And if we talk about the SNX, the first option being used, it is an extension to the SSL VPN that we might use. So what we do is that we can install a thin client, okay? We can install a thin client on end user's machine. The size of that would be approximately 650 KB, right? And once you install the thin client, right, we need to enter our username, password, or any combination of authentication mechanism which it supports. It could be checkpoint password, a personal certificate, a radius password, or it could be the secure ID, as in one-time password, right? And then why is it called the network extender, SSL network extender? Because in SSL VPN, as in browser-based VPN, you're kind of restricted to applications and the web browsing pages. As in, it could be a web page, it could be a URL of any resources that you might be trying to access, all right? Or it could be some applications, couple of applications. But SSL network extender being an extension to SSL VPN, all right? So you will not only be able to access all those applications which you can access via the SSL VPN, but additionally, you should be also able to access Outlook, RDP, and PuTTY as well. Or you could say any native applications, you can have that access. And one more additional point that you can use is endpoint compliance check, as in your posture policy. What is a posture policy? You can frame a posture policy, right, saying that only allow the SNX access to be made successful if the endpoint is compliant. And if the endpoint has to be compliant, he has to use, let's say, so-and-so version of antivirus, so-and-so vendor of antivirus, with so-and-so update being installed. All right. So it's totally up to your needs of infrastructure, as in how exactly you would want to have your posture policies being framed up. Right. And now, when it comes to the licensing, your SNX, it requires a mobile access software blade. Plus, additionally, it would also require IPsec VPN blade, because in order for you to get, because in this case, we are getting an office IP pool, as in one IP address we are getting from the office pool that we might have created at the time of configuring it. All right. So this functionality can be leveraged by using only IPsec VPN blade. So we need both mobile access software blade and the IPsec VPN blade, both of them. All right. So moving forward, we saw that we have three kinds of them. One is SNX, Checkpoint Mobile for Windows, Endpoint Connect. So the main difference between Endpoint Connect and SNX is that your Endpoint Connect can additionally support the desktop firewalls, all right? And you can have a little bit of a functionality of your endpoint security, right? So, and your Checkpoint Mobile for Windows, you can have this agent. It's called as Capsule Connect. You can download it from the Windows Store as well. So, and it uses SSL VPN negotiation, right? Architecting for remote users. All right. So when we are buying, let's say that we are designing a solution for remote access, especially in this COVID-19 crisis. So what are the various factors that we need to consider? A couple of factors that we need to consider at this are is that, will gateway be used only for VPN termination, or other functionality would be used as well? As in, we need to check if the gateway that the customer is going to procure, is he really going to go for the, he's going to use it exclusively for VPN access, or will he also be activating a couple of other features such as endpoint protection, threat protection, etc.? Right? And we also need to see if number of users who are going to connect to the gateway and means of connection, as in how are they going to access, for example, via the client, or it could be also via the SSL, via the browser. Right? So is there any kind of a specific network segmentation requirement present over there in the network infrastructure? You need to be sure about that as well. So when you're implementing it, you need to be considerate about all these factors. All right. So if we have a look into a couple of scenarios over here, we can see here that this is the standard scenario number 1, right? So here we can see that the VPN concentration, we have a NGTP firewall present over here, and then we have a data center firewall present over here. When we have the NGTP firewall present over here, we have the features such as threat protection and prevention, and we can optionally add the remote access VPN to this. Right here, the VPN concentration is being done in the threat prevention. As you can see over here, when the users are trying to connect to the network infrastructure, in order for them to gain access to the network resources, what they do is they open up their client and they can connect via the VPN. Right? And when they connect via the VPN, their traffic is hitting the NGTP firewall. And once it hits the NGTP firewall, that clearly means that VPN concentration is being done on your NGTP firewall, right? And of course, this is a fast way of deploying it, as in you don't really have to invest more time in deploying another box over there, right? And then we are not really adding multiple licenses over here, so you could say that this solution would come a little bit cheaper. But the problem here is that if we take a look at the packet flow which we had, first what happens is the packet hits the decryption zone, or you could say that the decryption module of the processor. So first the decryption takes place, and then it goes on to the routing, and then it goes on to the threat protection and prevention, and so on. So you can see here that the packet is traversing through a lot of modules, which will definitely trigger up your latency. So you might want to be considerate about your gateway performance here. Right? And of course, since you are doing both the concentration as well as threat prevention on the same blade, we kind of have limited segmentation options over here. Right? So you need to be considerate about all these factors, and then you need to do sizing appropriately. And if we have a look into the scenario 2, what we are doing is that we have a separate NGTP firewall, we have a separate dedicated box for remote access VPN, and we have a separate box for our DC firewall. Right? So we know here that this resource here is dedicated, it's being used dedicatedly for the remote access VPN purpose, so we don't really have to worry about the performance over here. Right? And since we have a dedicated resource over here, we have more segmentation granularity, as in we can write more we can write policies with much more granularity. Right? But the considerations here would be we'll have to spend a lot of time, or you could say that considerable amount of time in redesigning our architecture, right? And eventually, since we are procuring separate license, separate box, it might involve a little bit of a cost. So these are the two scenarios, which you can consider at the time of designing an architecture. So you have to be considerate about your cost and your performance. You need to consider these two factors primarily because we are revolving around these two factors most of the time, right? So moving forward, so what kind of policies can you possibly write, right? So do we have enough granularity? That's one of the questions. So if you look at the policy structure over here, and we know that the firewall follows a XML architecture for the policy base, all right? So we are taking an example of endpoint security VPN over here, in which we are going to form a IPSec communication or IPSec tunnel with that of your firewall, right? So as in it could be the main mode, it could be aggressive mode. There is a phase 2 involved over here, right? So, and supposedly we have gotten an office IP address, and we are trying to form a connection. So what you could do is, now we have been speaking about granularity, etc., right? So we need to be considerate about that. Now we can write a policy here having access roles in place, as in we are binding the IP address to an identity, right? So now the granularity starts. So we are binding IP address to our access role, as in the identity, all right, and we can define the destination address, as in destination resources. We can be specific about which application we would want to access and what kind of action you would want to take and other tracking options, right? And you can see over here, we are defining an access role over here, and then we can bind a user, right, to a specific network address. We can bind it to a machine. We can bind it to, let's assume a use case where we want to make sure that a user called as Bob, he has to access the remote VPN via a particular machine only, right? And he should be able to access only certain segments. So you can configure all of those details in the access role object, right? And then you can define the destination application over here based on the custom app signatures, right? And then you can define the means of tracking the entire communication which had taken place, right? So deployment methods. So now we need, this is something that we are coming across a lot of times these days. So we have two modes of deploying the remote access here, right? The first mode being manual method, where all we have to do is we need to download, or let's say that we can just download the MSI package from the Checkpoint website, and then we can use a GPO or equivalent to just push the agents, or you could say push the MSI package to multiple endpoints. And we can release out the guidelines saying that, hey, these are the instructions that you need to follow, and you have to install the agent by yourself, right? And you can see that there are three options that we can see over here. One is endpoint security VPN, that includes your other endpoint security options as well. And you have Checkpoint Mobile, which is only for Windows. This doesn't help you in Mac and Linux. And you have Secure Remote. Secure Remote, it is not being used these days a lot, or you could say that it's almost down to zero, because Secure Remote, you cannot really write your policies on the basis of that. This is free VPN, Secure Remote, all right? But then you cannot really write granular policies. You cannot define the source address, destination address, etc. Because you cannot write rules on the basis of secure remote access. So this is something that I would suggest that you don't consider this as an option, because it's a traditional way of accessing, not at all being used these days. Right. So coming back to the point over here. So what we do is that we can just download the MSI agent or MSI file from the Checkpoint website, and then we can push it to the end devices using the GPO. All right. And we can give them out the guidelines saying that, hey, this is how you should be performing the installation. All right. So you can see over here, after the initial connection, they have to just review the, of course, after following the guidelines, they can form this connection, and then they can click on properties, and then here you should be able to see the office remote IP address that you have gotten, right? And you can enable always connect. So whenever you boot up the system, automatically your system would be connecting to the, or else you could say that this application would pop up, and then you have to enter the username and password or any corresponding authentication mechanism you might have applied at the time of configuring your solution, right? You just need to click on enable always connect. So every time you connect, even if you restart your system, it will ask you that, hey, you have to enter the username and password. All right. So then that's your manual way of deploying. But nowadays we are coming across use cases where they say that, hey, we would want to, we don't really that much time and resources where we can distribute the agents and then ask them release out the guidelines, ask them to follow, then they're raising tickets. There is a lot of overhead over here, and then it's kind of, all the tasks are kind of mangled. So we would want to kind of automate the client deployment. So what do we do in this case? So in simple language, what you can do is that, let's say I'm the administrator. What I would do is that I can take that agent, right? That endpoint VPN agent, I can install it manually in the system, provide the username, password, whatsoever, right? And then perform normal installation along with providing the site details, your site ID, port numbers, etc. And I can install it. So when the endpoint agent gets installed, it's going to install it in this directory over here. C program files x86 checkpoint endpoint connect, right? And if you navigate to this directory, you'll find two files over here, trace.config and trace.defaults. So these two files are going to have all the configurations details which I had used at the time of installing my endpoint client. So what I can do then is, being an administrator, I can download this utility called as VPN config from the website, and I can run it. And when I run it, all I have to do is I have to enable these two options over here: replace trace defaults config and config file, right? And I can export these two files over there in my in my system, local system, right? And then I can click on save. All right. So what I'm trying to do here is that firstly I had installed the agent, and then what I did is that I went to this directory and I copied these two files. All right. And after I copy these two files, I'm going to save it somewhere in the desktop, for example. Then I run the VPN config utility, and then I enable these two options over here. Okay. Initially, trace.defaults and trace.config will come with no configuration. So what I need to do is I need to replace this null configurations with some configurations which are perfect enough. So what I'll do is that I'm going to browse and select those two files which I have pasted in my desktop. All right. And I can click on save. And once I do so, it is going to customize a MSI package for me. And then I can use that MSI package to, I can use that MSI package and push it to the endpoints. All right. And when I push it to the endpoints, there are two options over here. One, you can give out this command in the form of a guideline, and then they can just go ahead and execute this command, and they can have it executed, have it run. That's it. So it'll have all the details such as your site ID, your site details, your port number involved, your URL if you're being used, right? If it is being used, all right. So it'll have all those details. So all you are supposed to be doing is enter your username and password, and that's pretty much it. And if you don't even want this overhead, what you could do is you can just write a script, a bash script for Windows or any corresponding operating system. Sorry, this is only for Windows. So what you could do is you can write a batch file, and then you can distribute it along with the agents. So all they have to do is once they get the endpoint agent along with this batch file, they can just double click on this batch file. It will talk to the endpoint client, right? And it will have it installed, right? So I'll just reiterate both the things again. In the case of your manual client, you have to just download first. You'll have to download the MSI client from the website, and you have to just run it as an administrator, and then you can configure the settings manually, right? Based on the guidelines which is given out by your administrator. And if you don't want this overhead, optionally you can go for automated client deployment. And for this, the prerequisite, or you could say that the right procedure would be first, administrator has to do a little bit of a job. What administrator can do that first, he can just download the MSI client for the endpoint, right, in his local system, and he can make the configurations such as site ID, site URL, port number, etc., and he can click on save. Once he does so, he can just navigate to this particular directory, click on Endpoint Connect, and he'll be able to find out these two files, trace.default and trace.config. He can copy and paste it safely in some folder, right? Then what he can do is he can invoke or you can just download this this application called as VPN config, all right, and he can run it. And once he runs it, he can just click on these two options, because initially when you install the VPN client VPN config utility, you'll get two folder files, VPN that is trace.defaults and trace.config. Both of them would be 0, as in null. So what you can do is that you can browse it and then call those two files which you have extracted when you were configuring it previously, and you can click on save. You'll get the MSI file, right? You can distribute the MSI file along with this command. So all they have to do is that they have to just double click on this batch file that you might have, batch script that you might have created, and then they'll have their remote client installed, right? I hope it's clear. And if there are any questions, I would answer it by the end of this session. Coming to the advanced configurations, you can have the two-factor authentication for this easily. You have to leverage the concept of your dynamic ID. So what you need to do is you can just click on the gateway, right? And you can click on authentication over here, right? And you'll find dynamic ID settings over here. The reason why it's called dynamic ID is that because it changes with respect to time. It could be TOTP or it could be any SMS based time-based SMS service, right? And here you can click on edit. And once you do so, remember, you are always going to perform API integration with your SMS provider or your email provider. So what we do is that we can go to our SMS provider, and then there we'll be having a API integration format. You can just copy that URL and paste it over here. and enter the username and password of the API. And you can click on OK, and then you are done with your OTP via the SMS authentication. And same goes with the email authentication. Let's say that you were to provide the one-time passwords via the emails. You can again go to the same spot over here, dynamic ID settings, and you can click on edit, enter the API details, and of course you need to enter the username password which has been associated with that API, and you're good to go. So every time, let's say that you try to authenticate, the message would go to your OTP server. That could be your email server or SMS server, and you'll be replied with the OTP. And then you can enter the OTP value over there in your authentication portal, and you're good to go. All right. And note, Checkpoint doesn't have a default or an inbuilt SMS provider or email gateway, so you'll have to configure it explicitly. All right. Then endpoint compliance. This is the compliance blade which you can use. Now, since we are talking about zero trust framework, whose main focus is on not only trusting the external bodies, and as in we had been cautious about the external attackers all this while by placing all those network security devices such as web application firewall with respect to the OSI model, right? But the zero trust framework says that, hey, we should not only be considering the external point of attackers, we should also be considerate about insider threats. It could be a disgruntled employee, it could be any spear phishing attack, it could be a masquerade, it could be anything. But you need to be cautious about that, because nowadays the most popular method of exploitation is for sure attacks being originated from internal users or internal machines. So you need to be cautious about that. All right. So now, what can we do possibly to make sure that we are complying with the zero trust framework? So Checkpoint comes with a blade called as compliance blade. There you can write the posture policies. So what is a posture policy? Posture policy is a policy which you write to perform or decide the overall security posture of, it could be a subnet, it could be a specific endpoint machine, it could be the entire infrastructure. It is totally subjective to the needs that you might propose. All right. So yes, it does come with the predefined endpoint compliance policy as well. If you would want to be, if you would want to go with that, you can go for it. If you would want to be more specific about your needs of the organization, you have the flexibility to do so. All right. So all you need to do is select the gateway and go to the endpoint compliance module, right? And you can select the profile over here, right? And you can go to your compliance blade and then you can write some custom values as well. It's totally up to how you would want to have it configured, right? You can create a custom policy for yourself as well. It is totally up to you. As in, you would want to perform the applications check or antivirus check, you can have that done as well. All right, so that's pretty much it. And then now moving on to the mobile security, we have two type of clients for your mobile devices. All right, the first kind of VPN that you have is a Capsule workspace, and the second one is Capsule Connect. So the Capsule workspace, what it does is that it is very much similar to the containers that we create. If you have worked with any EMM solution such as Mobile Iron or AirWatch or Citrix, so you might have come across this term called as containers. So what is a container? Creating a space. For example, you have an operating system or a kernel or whatsoever. So you're creating a space inside that container, or sorry, you can create a space inside that memory, all right, which is independent of the functions of your main system itself. As in, any interrupts, which is we know the concept of interrupts which are raised by other in the microprocessors we have, right? So if there is any interrupt being raised for the operating system, it will be totally independent. As in, this workspace is not going to get any interrupts from the base operating system, because you're forming a separate container which is totally independent of the base one. All right. So, and inside that container, you can have a mail application. You can define a policy saying that my mail application, that is my Outlook, should be accessible only via the workspace, or all my calendars, contacts, messages, the files which I download, OWA, etc. So anything. For example, what I can do is I can frame a policy saying that I would want to have my mail application being opened only from the Capsule workspace, which is very much secure because it is encrypted with the appropriate algorithm. All right, it's generally encrypted with AES 256, in case if you're wondering. All right, so your mails would open in this container only, in this workspace only, and any attachments which are coming via the email, it would go to the saved file section. All your messages are going to be present here itself. So anything which is present inside the workspace which you have configured, it is not really going to go outside of this workspace. All right, and the day your employee leaves the organization, you can also have the remote wipe enabled for it, as in you can just click on the user and then you can wipe off the device. So with when it comes to wiping off the device, what would happen is that it is going to erase the container totally. So with that, when you're erasing the contents of the container, it is not really going to impact the rest of the applications. It's only be going specific to the capsule workspace. Right, so it supports push notifications if you would want to notify your user of something, of some, let's say, some activity, some downtime or whatsoever. Right, so it supports HTML5 WebSockets, so that you can have it integrated with your HTML5 gateways, quite obviously. Right, so it supports remote wipe support. Right, and I explained you the use case for that. The use case would be that, let's say that an employee is leaving the organization and he would no longer require the access to the all these applications because he's no longer part of that organization. So you can have the remote wipe enabled for it, and then you can perform the operation, and once you do so, all the container data would be erased. All right, it requires an additional license. Of course, there is a specific license for this. And then this is about your workspace. Now the Capsule Connect. So Capsule Connect is a IPSec form, right? As you can see over here, it's using 3-SHA-1 as an example, and then you can also see that it's IPSec, right? So it's a layer 3 VPN client. All right, so this is what you could do is that you can have it installed on your mobile phones, and then it would support both SSL as well as IPsec. SSL would be as in to form the connection, it would use IPsec, and SSL is an optional, you could say. Right, and then if you would want to have the SSL for that, what you could do is that you can just enable the mobile access blade, and once you do so, any applications, any web application you are accessing would be going through the SSL VPN. Right, authentication methods that you can use is username, password, user certificates, or your radius or one-time password tokens would also do. Right, so you can also have the VPN connection persistency upon device roaming. You can have that configured if you really want to. So, and on demand also, as in the case of persistency, it will be active all the time, and in the case of on demand, whenever he would want to, let's say an entity would like to access the corporate resources, what he can do is he can open up the application, and then on demand he can request the resource by entering his credentials or any other means of authentication method which has been configured for him. Right, so or else you can also go for a scan QR code method. Right, an API is available for external integration. It would additionally require mobile access blade. So now MTD is a very common trend these days, as in we know that a lot of attacks are going on, even the applications. We know that BYOD framework is becoming very common these days, right? As in most of the organizations, they don't want to stick to the typical, or you could say traditional endpoint security model, right? They would want to provide certain level of flexibility to the end users to allow them to work from any kind of any choice of the mobile device they would want to use. Right, it could be any it could be any kind of a personal laptop, it could be a personal phone or whatsoever. So you want to give them flexibility, but at the same time, since we have been speaking about zero trust framework, we want to make sure that we are providing them adequate amount of security. Right, so mobile Checkpoint comes along with the MTD solution called as SandBlast. Right, so well, for the endpoint, for the workstations, as in let's say let's say that you have implemented the BYOD policy, and then user has come up with his personal laptop. In that case, you can install the SandBlast agent on it. Right, and then that SandBlast agent would execute functionality such as threat emulation, threat extraction, zero-day phishing, or in nutshell, you could have any number of threat blades activated on it, and you can perform your threat detection and prevention. And of course, you do get forensics along with it for you to perform any sort of investigation, right? And yes, if we look at the key product benefits over here, it protects against known and unknown cyber attacks. Known attacks because it uses two layers of defenses. One is signature-based detection, and for the unknown, there is AI engine, right? Behavioral guard. It's called as behavioral guard. And the second benefit would be to it's a best endpoint security to combat targeted and evasive attacks, right? Targeted as in it's like spear phishing, evasive as in your ransomwares and all that intend to evade your network security devices, right? And the threat catching rates are quite high, and then it has been found that it has very low false positives, right? And then you get very good reports, very concise, very comprehensive, and easy to of course understand. You can impose the quarantine feature, right? Full attack containment. Of course, you do get the, you have features such as snapshot reversion, right? And quarantine, when using which what you could do is, let's say the ransomware attack is going on, you can write a policy saying that if the ransomware attack is going on, mitigate the attack and quarantine the machines, as in chop off the layer 2 and layer 3 channels automatically without having to plug out the physical Ethernet connections. So you can directly chop off layer 2 and layer 3 communication channels, and then you should be good to go, right? So, and you have SandBlast Mobile, right? This is for your mobile phones. What you need to do is, this is applicable to both iOS as well as Android. You can just download this application called as CheckPoint Mobile, and once you do so, it will be able to detect any malicious application which is running inside, or any attacks being launched directly on your mobile phone, right? Or let's say that you are accessing any malicious content, it should be potentially able to detect it and have it blocked for you, or you could take any corresponding action, right? Such as quarantine, etc. So now, right, so we saw how exactly it's forming the zero trust framework over here using the VPN. And now, the first was using VPN, the second was by imposing the posture policies, and thirdly by imposing threat prevention, right? And then we have the flexibility to choose any kind of authentication, right? For example, we can go for secure ID, we can go for multi-factor authentication, we can go for radius, etc. We can have as many authentication mechanisms as we would wish to. All right, so with this three main pillars intact, as in your IPSec, any VPN connectivity, your posture policy, and your mobile threat detection and prevention, right? With this, we are able to achieve the zero trust framework. Right. So with this, I'd like to end up my session, and let's see if you have any questions to ask, please. So with this, we'd like to say goodbye. Thank you so much for your time, guys. Have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Afzal. Thank you.